So we've got Steve Carlson in studio with us tonight. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat. And the reason, like the catalyst for bringing him in this evening, was to talk about tariffs. That was the disagreement in the wake of our co-host, Bob Anderson, who is a candidate for U.S. Senate running as a Republican for the other seat that is up this year. The topic of tariffs came up during that conversation, and Steve was listening and started to engage me on social media, and that's why we have him in studio tonight. So let's finally get around to it here on Closing Argument. My name's Walter Hudson, Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM. Catch us streaming at TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com and on your iHeartRadio app. We're here 9 to 11 weeknights. 651-989-5855, the number to join us. Brad Omlin taking those calls and producing the show. So, my take on tariffs in a nutshell is that they are inherently and always consistently economically destructive, because what they do is they disrupt the process of a buyer trying to seek the highest value at the lowest cost in the market. That there is no scenario whereby adding a tariff to a transaction, which is a tax, adding a tax to a transaction adds value to that transaction. And therefore, the idea that we're somehow going to tax ourselves to prosperity in the form of tariffs is inherently flawed. Your response to that, Steve Carlson?
Well, I think the idea that tariffs are never valuable is just historically wrong. Now, what you're talking about is something people will always say smoot holly, in those sentences, and they're talking about the 1930s. But if you look at the beginning of our country, well, first of all, the tariffs funded the federal government basically instead of the income tax until 1917.
Just to pause on that point, because I think that's a totally legitimate statement. However, I think a distinction that we need to make is the tariffs that funded the federal government were universal tariffs. So it was a tariff on everything that came into the country at a certain rate for the explicit purpose of funding the federal government. They weren't targeted tariffs meant to protect particular industries such as the ones we're considering today.
And I don't think that's what Trump is trying to do. Trump is trying to in fact, he offered that everybody would drop their tariffs. But if you look back at the history again, I did mention in 1917, and I was surprised to see that when I looked it up last year. But first of all, is protectionism. Now, this country was founded on protectionism. If you look at the extremely rapid economic growth of both the United States and actually Britain at the time that our colonies were founded, a lot of it was attributable to the Industrial Revolution. But that happened with the extreme protectionism. Where it comes from is the Britain government did not even allow us to make our own shoes. They would not allow us to ship our products to them or any other country in our own ships, because they wanted their British subjects to make shoes to sell to everybody with the new technology that made really good shoes, and to build ships.
But it sounds like what you're actually saying is that we rebelled against the protectionism of the British.
No, well, we had a war over that, but both countries exploded economically. That's my point. My point is that we had amazing economic growth during that time. And so you have to go back and say, well, why did we have that? And so what you're looking at is this really an ideological argument with certain industries who feel like they're hit by, like you say, they're hit by the trade war kind of, a scenario. I'm not saying that it happens all the time that there's trade wars whenever there's a tariff, but you're right. From a strictly, rational, classical economics point of view, it's going to be an added cost, and then it's going to be passed on to the consumer.
So I appreciate you acknowledging that.
Yeah.
But you obviously believe that under certain circumstances, it's nonetheless the right thing to do. So describe those circumstances.
Well, for instance, you don't want to lose whole industries. Okay. So even though you might say there's a greater value to some set of consumers because you've had this also perfect, classical economics, which you never really have. That's always it's never perfect. There's never perfect knowledge of any of the economic players. They don't know what the best prices are. They're basically engaged in economic activity. The good thing about the classical economics, you want to give people a chance to change their choices if it will benefit them. And I think,
but isn't that chance only available with the choice?
No, I think it's always available. I think everybody always has choices, and so.
But you're talking about taking away the choice by imposing a tariff, imposing a government restriction.
You're not taking it away, but I do think that it can be affected, and we don't want that. We don't want if our farmers want to sell to China, we want them to be able to do that, and I think Trump wants that too. The big thing that's coming up now is the national security. Okay, we were before they made that new budget deal. After the debacle of the financial cliff and the shutdown of the government, and then Trump made a big, massive deal on the budget, which funded our defense, funded our military because it was being held hostage by these politics. So that's a very good thing. But before that, we were losing control of our ability to set prices for steel and aluminum as we have this buildup of the military, which we have and we're going to have. But and we also will need that to produce more cars. So and for export and for use here at home. And so we need the steel. We need to take the iron ore out of, northern Minnesota. We have plants that are shut down. I mean, if you're looking at the effect of protectionism, I mean, look at northern Minnesota. What's that all about? It's about basically another country like China coming in and dominating not just the U.S. commodities market for iron ore and copper, but the whole world.
So let's
explore, we're at their mercy.
Let's explore that a little bit.
Sure.
Because when you talk about China dominating the market on something like steel or aluminum, there's a reason for that, right? Like the reason people would choose to import their steel from China is, again, because they're seeking the highest value at the lowest cost. So isn't that good? Like if your concern is national security and you want to be able to build up the military infrastructure of the United States in as efficient a manner as possible and get the most bang for your buck, wouldn't you want to get the lowest priced, highest quality steel available on the global market rather than just restrict it to what you can produce domestically?
Absolutely. I was looking at the other end of the production where people are taking all the ore. So the first time I became aware of China's massiveness when I was looking at like Australia, and they were buying up all of their commodities. They're buying up all of our commodities because they have a massive engine. Now, as far as steel production, the problem we've had with steel production is that we had the old style factories and foundries. And so that's what shut our iron ore down, is the other countries were able to produce steel much more efficiently because they had more modern plants. They had smaller plants, and we want those too. And now we need to get those. We don't want just to use the iron ore, but we don't want to be inefficient for our military. No.
You're a market guy, as I can discern from some of the things you've said.
Right.
What is it that motivates a business to improve its processes? Isn't it competition?
If you look at World War II, that was one of the greatest engines for economic growth in our history.
So we need to go into more wars?
But people got to get serious, and we knew that they weren't always the cheapest prices. The thing about World War II production is quality control. It was amazing quality control. You've heard of, built-in obsolescence. They were building cars that never broke down, so they couldn't sell any cars. And so we need to have that kind of quality, and that's going to make our goods more competitive. These things you can't control, like you say, they're controlled by market forces.
But this is, and we do have to go to a break.
Sure.
But in as concise a manner as you can address this, this would be my question in response to that. How are you going to get there? How are you going to improve quality by eliminating foreign competition? Because that's what a tariff is for, right? Like the whole purpose of it is to neutralize the foreign competition so that you can make the domestic production viable.
Okay, let me just address that. If you look at our farms, now if we go into this tariff situation more deeply, our farming can be hit. But we have always had subsidies, and essentially tariffs and subsidies are the same thing, to help our farmers so we don't lose them. So, and we protect them against erosion, drought, and also changes in the market. And that's a helpful thing. It doesn't mean we don't want them to be the best possible farmers, but it means we recognize that these are important national resources. Steel is just as food is, and we've got to protect that. And that's what I see Trump doing. And because we haven't protected it, here in Minnesota, we've just lost massive jobs. And we can't have this. We've gone through the steel industry getting beat out by foreign competition, and now auto industry, and the people in the Iron Range are in trouble. And that you heard that when Trump came, they know.
They are very grateful to the protectionism that they are enjoying.
Not protectionism, but the attention. They're not. How are they being protected? Because
what's the point of doing the tariff if it's? I mean, you just talked about jobs.
Yeah.
That isn't a tariff meant to provide jobs for a particular industry? Isn't that inherent? Isn't that what protectionism is?
I don't think so. I think it's just to make sure you have an industry. What Britain was concerned about is they couldn't have a shipbuilding industry, which they used to beat the Spanish Armada. It was very key to their national security, and they did not want to let it get away. We need to also protect ourselves, and this isn't all going to be about tariffs. We want fair trade, and we also want national security. So I think that there's a basket of not deplorables, but good economic policies coming out of Donald Trump.
Steve Carlson, Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate. We'll wrap this up when we return. Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM, TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.